My name is Dan Harton, and I lead the customer and marketing team here at Hire Easy. And what we want to do is we want to bring this blog post that we wrote about the 8 habits of an effective recruiter to life. So what we did over the course of the last probably month and a half is reached out to agency recruiters, in-house recruiters, corporate recruiters at all levels, and really identified what were the biggest habits that you do every single day to be the best recruiting professional out there. The most common themes that we saw were um, for this session, it's all about making that phone screen conversational. We probably had really, really good phone screens and really, really bad phone screens as a candidate, as well as a recruiter, especially when you're first tap into the recruiting industry. I remember making my first recruiter call. I didn't know what to say. Do I go off a script? What do I do when I reach out to somebody for a phone screen? Do I just talk about the specific job description? Do I do specifically about them? What really is making an impact in them? And what I love to do is bring on Leticia Berry. She has done it all. She's been at big tech at companies like AWS, VMware, as a senior recruiter there. Now she pivoted and she's more on the agency side. She's a senior recruiting manager at Frederick Fox, and she's done both sides of the house. And I would love to have it really be engaging in this chat of your experiences and some tips, some resources that you've utilized to make that phone screen very conversational. Like I said, I put in the chat of the blog that we went off of to kind of create this to more of a webinar, as well as the link to YouTube. So if you want to check out previous topics, previous habits, we are on number 7 today. And if you want to look through 1 through 6, please take a look at that. But I'd love to introduce Leticia. She's a well-known recruiting leader within the space. I'm super excited to chat with her, but Leticia, give me a backstory of who you are, what you're up to, and then we can dive in.
Hey, Dan, thank you so much for having me. And I'm just going to apologize. I've got 3 Siamese cats, and apparently they're just having a bit of a cat fight here right next to my desk. So
Love
apologies
it.
for that. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. Like Dan said, I'm currently an agency recruiter with Frederick Fox. We primarily do finance and accounting recruiting. So this is a new area for me. And then my background has been in tech so far.
So let's talk through the recruiter phone screen. You've identified a candidate, they either applied or you reached out and you're setting the stage for that first interaction with that candidate. You've been on agency, you've been on in-house, and now you're learning a new set of skills, a new industry doing financing and accounting. Walk me through any tips, resources, anything like that if you've experienced maybe that has been different from corporate side to agency side.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my main tips are I like to send an email about 15 minutes before the call to the candidate with the job description, the details of the role, and kind of what the purpose of the call is. That way, they're more likely to answer the phone if it is someone who I've cold sourced. Or if it's an applicant, they're going to be reminded, they're going to know exactly which job we're talking about. I find that's really helpful in today's landscape where we have so many people applying to so many roles. To be honest, like they may not know which role you're talking to them about. So I like sending that email first to give kind of an overview of the role and then also what to expect from the call. And then at the beginning of the call, I like to introduce myself. I will try to do a little bit of prep on the candidate and understand, like, hey, why am I really excited to talk to them? And then I try to add in that aspect. So, for instance, last week I was talking to someone who'd played arena football way back at the beginning of his career. So I said, hey, like, I'm really excited to talk to you about this role specifically. And then also hoping to learn a little bit more about your background, like when you were in arena football, just to make it a little bit more friendly and casual. And then I am a big proponent of using a CRM or an ATS, whatever you have, or Hire Easy if you're lucky enough to have that, and using some sort of a template just to keep you on track during the phone screen. So I like to start with an open-ended question to really kind of get to know the candidate after I give them that little introduction about myself. And then I do use my template to go through, making sure that I'm asking all of the questions I know I need to be able to present this candidate to my hiring manager. Um, and those are the things that I've really found have been helpful.
I think one of the key takeaways that I've actually done some research on this more on the sales side, recruiting side of that follow up prior to the phone screen that you're having. Like you mentioned, candidates right now are applying to anything and everything, especially if they're out of work right now. And sometimes they forget which role, which company, which recruiter I'm talking to. So I love the 15-minute calendar little message of saying, "Hey, this is Leticia. We're going to have a conversation in 15 minutes, 30 minutes. You could do this a day ahead of time of just reassuring them your time is valuable, their time is valuable, and kind of a structure of what to expect going into the phone interview." I love that. Curious, did you always utilize that, or was that something that you've evolved within your recruiting career?
This is definitely that's something that's evolved for me, just honestly in kind of response to the market, because I was finding that the more screens I was doing, like people would be like, "Oh, who is this?" Or they don't answer the phone. You have to leave a voicemail, send a text, and then you're like 5 to 7 minutes behind when you actually do get them on the phone. And I really do think, like you're saying, people are applying to so many more jobs today if they are actively looking, especially with some of the AI tools that you can use and easy apply on LinkedIn. Honestly, like a lot of people I found just weren't really expecting my call, even though it was a scheduled call. So I found that prepping the candidate via email makes sure that they're more likely to answer. I keep my day more on track. And then also, they have all of that information. So I'm not spending as much time at the beginning of the call describing the role. I'll still certainly kind of hit on the sizzle points and what's really exciting. But I'm able to focus more on them and kind of talk about them versus talk about the role with that kind of email. It's not something I did in corporate. I think a lot of times when you're corporate, people are, especially if they're applicants that were maybe very specifically applying, they were more very excited to talk to me versus in my role today. But I honestly think it would have been really helpful then just to make things faster and more kind of organized.
I think you hit it the nail on the head when you're saying that they're applying to a ton of roles, and sometimes to be transparent and vulnerable a little bit. Sometimes maybe if you're in that corporate role or you're having a lot of applicants, as a recruiter, you kind of have the mindset of, well, if you didn't show up to the recruiter screen or prepared, like I don't want to be with you, I don't want to work with you anyways. But I think getting us back to being a people business and realizing the holistic structure of applying to jobs right now and being a little humble of saying, hey, here's the expectations. This is what I want to go over. I want to talk about your goals, your interests, and then kind of the next steps of that makes it a little more personal, a little bit more human from that versus like if they don't want to show up or they're late, I'm just going to write them off. I think personally, I've done that in the past because, oh, well, if they're not going to show up this, then they're not going to show up to the on-site interview
Mhm.
prepared. Something along those lines. I think we need to sit back and realize as a recruiter, our goal is to not only identify if they're a good fit for the role, but also help the candidate on the front end to be prepared for those additional conversations. Um, do you send the job description ahead of time in that little prep note of saying, "Hey, I'm excited to chat with you"? Any other resources, tools have you utilized on the front end even before you chat with anybody?
Yeah, so I'm definitely sending over the job description. If I was internal, I would definitely send over like the team description as well as the hiring manager. For roles that we have a clearly defined compensation range that we're able to disclose, I'm definitely including that as well because part of it is really saving ourselves time and also saving the candidate time. I had someone last week who I talked to. She had applied to my role on LinkedIn. I sent her, a time to schedule. We scheduled 15 minutes before the call. I send her over the details of the role. We get on the phone call. We have a nice little chat about her background. And she said, I appreciate you sending this email over because that compensation isn't going to work for me. But then we were able to really dive more into what she is looking for, what an ideal role does look like for her. So we're still able to utilize the time to our advantage. Because I think it can be really frustrating when we leave some of those questions for the end, and only in cases that we're able to share that information where we know very well-defined parameters. But I do think it can save a lot of time. I actually had a phone interview when I was actively looking for a role, where I didn't know what the compensation range was, got half an hour into a call to find out that my expectations were honestly significantly higher than what they were offering. And I felt like that was kind of a bad experience, even though it was a lovely chat. I would have preferred to have that information up front so I could have maybe saved myself a little bit of time, and also the hiring manager who's actively trying to fill this role.
In your experience, I think reviewing resumes and getting candidates, you only have so many time in the day, and prioritizing candidates within that phone screen uh, can be sometimes challenging. There's, factors out there that and differences in resume writing between males, females,
Mhm.
how you conduct yourself in a conversation. We know for a fact that men tend to talk about themselves more than women. Men aren't afraid to be boastful, but women tend to have a little more imposter syndrome than men. And these factors kind of demonstrate why it's crucial to kind of look beyond a resume or standard interview questions to identify those top candidates. What would you say, or what insight would you share, maybe a personal experience or in situation that you know of going beyond the resume and really diving deep on the goals, the interests of a candidate and why they'd be a good fit for the role?
Yeah, I think I'm very lucky to have been able to work at organizations that had unbiased trainings and to have some of that knowledge going into these conversations. But I do find that a great approach is to ask the same type of behavioral based questions to the candidates that you're interviewing. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're asking questions that are going to give you like the information you need, but asking uniform questions to those same type of candidates, and then asking some of those more digging questions if the candidate is giving you an answer, but maybe they're not providing as many specifics, or maybe they're using a lot of we language. Really asking some of those more digging questions to understand, what did this person really do? What was their impact? And then how does that relate to what my hiring manager is looking for in this role and candidate? And I think one of the things that we as recruiters can give to candidates, a lot of times, sometimes it feels like, oh, I don't really have a lot that I can give to a candidate. But one thing that is valuable is I can tell that candidate, this is what the hiring manager is really looking for in candidates and in experiences. Tell me examples that you have that really relate to those. So, not necessarily leading the candidate, but just sharing with them what you know about the role in the hiring manager, and then making sure you're asking the digging questions to really get at that kind of nuts and bolts to understand, do they have the experience or not? Because they may not. But
For
I
sure.
do think you're right. Men definitely put a lot more out there. And then taking that information, if the person does progress through the interview process, and making sure you're kind of prepping them for interviews. As you know, Dan, we worked at Amazon together, and one of the main things we would prep candidates on is really speaking in I language and not we language, and making sure that they were making their own impact known in the interview process. And so if you're taking good notes in your CRM as you're doing your phone screen, you can also be identifying which ways you can help a candidate to better perform in the interview process.
There's a misconception that that first round, that recruiter phone screen, is all about having the candidate sell themselves to you and the company. But really good recruiters, and one of the habits of an effective recruiter is having it more conversational and understanding the whys behind the candidate. And when I made the switch of maybe elevating my career, I realized that it's not all about having the candidate sell themselves to you, but having the information, the data, based on the hiring manager's requests about qualifications or the X factors of those conversations you've had in that intake. Um, and really peel back, like you said, of why this person would be a really good fit based on that hiring manager. And really asking the whys of why are you interested? Why do you think your skill set would be really good fit for that? And then once I got all that information, I got really good of getting a proposal or a framework to sell the candidate back to the hiring
Mhm.
managers. Raise your hand in the chat if you've ever had a candidate you thought went really, really good on the recruiter phone screen. You talk to the manager and say, "Hey, I think you should interview him," and they say, "Actually, no, I don't really want to." And then you look back and you're like, "Did I really represent that candidate in the best of my abilities based on the conversation I had with them or reasons why they would be a good fit for them?" What I used to do is, "Hey, here's the qualifications, here's the specific ideal candidate based on the hiring manager," and then tweak my conversation based to the candidate of like, "Hey, why are you going to be a good fit for this specific role?" Um, Walk me through kind of your selling process after you have that conversation with the candidate. How do you sell that back to the hiring manager? And what have you done, tips, tricks to really close the gap of the hiring manager saying yes, just set them up with me for an interview?
So I think it all comes back to your intake meeting with the hiring manager. And like you said, understanding what they're truly looking for. And not only in the intake, but if you're presenting multiple candidates, listening to their feedback, what they like, what they don't like, and then highlighting those things. Also speaking their language and being brief. When I first started recruiting, we would send out such long paragraphs about these candidates we were sending over to clients. And now that I've been on both sides of the kind of the world here in recruiting, I know hiring managers are so busy. So trying to be as brief as possible, really just sharing the details that they want to know and then following up and being persistent. And if they say no, if you really think they're a strong candidate, be like, "Hey, I understand you're saying no, but this is why I thought they were so strong. Like if we have a weekly sync, let's talk about that because we need to be on the right page to actually fill your job effectively." And I think having a little bit of backbone and really like fighting for your candidate if you think they're going to be the right fit, but also being very like humble and saying, "Hey, you know your team, right? But let me reevaluate my search and better find you people because I thought this was spot on and you're saying it's not. So we've got a little bit of a miscommunication before spending a lot of time sourcing the same profiles and having that same, response." The other thing I think, Dan, to your point, is about like how to sell the candidate, asking the candidate what they're looking for, not just like I think candidates have a natural ability to want to say, "I'm looking for what you're offering," but really trying to dig a little deeper, like, "Hey, obviously we're on the phone, but like, why are you open to a conversation? Like, what's going on for you?" And trying to understand their motivations, so that you can really share that with the hiring manager too, so they can start to put those pieces together of why this person could be a good fit. And of course, that's going to help you close them down the road as well.
Do you ever ask the hiring managers or whoever you're working with from the business of specific questions that you want to ask the candidate so you can get that on the front end? And how do you ensure those conversations do not get repeated 6 times throughout an interview process and everybody asking the same questions? Because
Yeah.
as a candidate, I feel like sometimes that happens at companies of saying, "Okay, well, the recruiter talked to me. Then I'm talking to the hiring manager. They asked the exact same questions. I gave the exact same answers. And then you're in throughout the interview process and you haven't really understood who they are and why they'd be a good fit."
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think for roles where you're not seeing success with the first few candidates that you pass over to your hiring manager, it can be really helpful to ask about screening questions, especially if they're like, "Hey, we did 3 phone interviews and none of them got through. We need to evaluate why that is. And can we take some of that lifting off and actually ask those questions on the front end?" And when I'm asking those questions to candidates, I'm going to be truly transparent and say like, "Hey, this is a question that my senior architect gave me to ask you about your background. I'm not technical myself, but I'm going to ask that you give a technical answer. And I always ask people if I can record the calls because we've got such great AI note taking skills now.
Mhm.
Uh, and then I will just paste that into my, submissions to my hiring managers so that they can see exactly what that person said. But the way to kind of help the candidate experience there is by doing a great pre-brief with your interview panel. And so making sure they know, hey, this is the information we've already collected. If you're going to be asking the same question, maybe ask it in a different way to see, are you getting that same answer? Like more of like a check versus just having that person go through like all of the same questions by different people. So that if you are having a candidate meet with, say, 3 people, they feel like all of those conversations are valuable for them, not just repeating the same things. And I would say documentation, Dan, is the main thing. You've got to tell people what you asked, and you've got to make sure those interviewers are telling you what they asked so the hiring managers can make a decision.
It's all about expectations on the front end and then reassuring that they know those expectations. You give them the resources to be successful throughout the interview process. Sometimes we forget that every company interviews a little different and they want different answers based on the company that they work for. So one answer, maybe they're looking for something at AWS and they give the exact same answer at VMware when they interviewed, and one was great, one wasn't, because the candidate didn't understand what the actual hiring manager was actually looking for. What would you say to individuals and recruiters that say, hey, we're not going to give them the answers, but we're going to give them a framework for success? Isn't that like cheating and giving them resources to be successful in the interview?
I mean, I think if you're giving all of the candidates that are going through the process the same resources, it's not cheating because everyone is being evaluated fairly. And that really goes back to like taking away biases. It also can just make the conversations feel better from both sides because people know what they're expecting and they're more prepared for that conversation, both on the hiring manager side and the candidate side. If someone wants to say it's cheating, I think today's world, like we're all on TikTok and all these different resources that have like a million different articles on how to prepare for interviews. And you might have some candidates that are reading a lot of those articles and doing a lot of preparation, and you might have candidates that are doing none. So I actually think preparing your candidates the same way can just kind of help like make it so there's less of a delta there so you can better evaluate the candidates versus having someone who's just a great interviewer and did a lot of prep versus someone who's maybe actually a better fit but they didn't do any prep. Having the recruiter help them to understand like these are the things you should focus on is going to kind of bridge that gap. And for candidates that are really prepared, like they may not need that, but it can just be another touch point for you when you have a quick prep call to like ask how their job search is going, where they're at in the process, like how the calls have been going with your company, and getting a better feel for like that person where they're at so you don't get surprised if they decline an offer or if they pull themselves out. Like you're just better in touch even if you're like this person knows everything about the interview process from all of their independent research.
For sure. I think that's the key crucial point of the negotiation process from a salary overall compensation doesn't start when you actually get the offer. It starts in that first initial screen of identifying what their goals, what their interests, what's their drivers. Based on that, what's going to be a fit. I know we got a couple more minutes. What have you done differently from passive candidates that you're sourcing for a specific role that they have a full-time job, things are great, versus maybe an active job seeker that have multiple recruiting opportunities, whatever it may be. They're talking to a ton of people. Has your approach changed, and do you do anything differently from passive to active job seekers?
Yeah, for me, I definitely start the screens a little bit differently. So, for instance, if someone applied to a role, I'm going to thank them for applying to the position and make sure they have a good, clear understanding of what we're talking about. If someone's passive who I've reached out to, I'm really going to emphasize, like, hey, I'm so excited that you're talking to me today because I saw this in your background and that's what prompted me to call you. So they feel like more personalized. And then if it is a passive candidate, sometimes we do phone screens and it's not a good fit, right? For whatever reason. I always try to give some sort of value back. So if I'm reviewing someone's resume, for instance, last week I was talking to a staff accountant. He's only had one job since college. His resume, to be honest, poorly formatted. Spacing was different, font types were different. And I just said on the call, like, hey, if it's okay, I'd like to give you some feedback on your resume. I'm noticing these areas where the formatting is not the same, and I would recommend changing that. It's going to give you a better chance in some of these interviews. Or if you talk to someone and you're like, I had no idea that you were at a SaaS company. I'm looking for SaaS company people, but nothing on your resume told me that. Like giving them that kind of feedback that can be more of a value add. And like with ChatGPT, I just put that resume into ChatGPT, fix the formatting, and send it back to him. He's not a good fit for my client, but hopefully that was still a positive experience for him because he got some value out of it.
Love it. Giving value on every single phone call, every touch point within that for now or in the future
Mhm.
is the best case scenario. Because, for example, if you talk about the overall compensation portion of that and they say, hey, for example, you were in that situation not too long ago, you said, and said, hey, my compensation is a little higher than what you were offering. Okay, no problem. At least you know the misconception of candidates sharing with the recruiter of that overall compensation is really, I want the most money possible. Everybody wants the most money
Yeah.
possible, right? Within that budget. And I always would tell people of like, hey, I want to give you the most money possible as much as possible. If it's not going to be in the range, like I don't want to waste your time in that. But I would love to understand kind of what your goals or interests, where you want to be within that compensation. So in the future, if I do have that role, we don't have to go back of saying, hey, what are you looking for? You might be a fit because I already have our conversation documented of what you actually are looking for. And then on the flip side, if you're working on agency and you have that same conversation, the the problem of sometimes agency recruiters is they don't look back at the notes or look back at the conversations that this person had. So they just like another recruiter calls them up and asks this exact same conversation where it's like people are going to stop picking up the phone
Mhm.
because people are asking the same conversation. So what I would do is on the front end ask and tell them the why you're asking. And to be fair, if a candidate is interviewing whatever, I want to know that. And I tell them that like, hey, are you interviewing anywhere else? And people are like, nope, 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 nope. It's like I hope you're interviewing at places because that's going to give us leverage at the end to get you the best offer possible. So let me know. And also, if another company's moving a little quicker than us, let me know that because I need to speed up the urgency on my end. Because whether you take this role or not, I want you to have the best opportunities and cards dealt to you to make the best decision for you and your career. So whether it's our company or another company, you have options. So I tell them that on the front end, and they're more willing to share the information with me because it's the why. Why are you
Yeah.
asking? So I know we're a 1 minute over. Any last minute tips, advice, anything like that you want to share with the audience?
I think my biggest tip is document the conversations, have a template, make sure that you're asking the questions you have to ask. You don't want to have that situation where you had a great call with someone and then you're like, oh, I forgot to ask them about their visa status or something like that. So just be organized, take your notes, make sure that you are providing a good service to your candidates and also your hiring managers, and don't waste your time talking to people that are not going to be the right fit. Be very polite, but if someone is going on and on and on and you can tell that they're not a right fit for this role, like, finish the conversation in a polite way.
Love it. Awesome. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Leticia, for sharing your knowledge. That wraps up habit 7 of the 8 habits of an effective recruiter. We will be back next week on Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central Time. If you want to take a look at previous episodes, feel free to look on their YouTube. I put it in the chat. Until next time, thank you again, Leticia. Thank you, everyone that attended, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.